The blood trail led straight to her barn. Abigail Hayes stood in the doorway of her cabin, lantern raised, watching the dark drops glisten against the frost-hardened ground. Her breath came out in white clouds. November in Dakota Territory was unforgiving, and tonight the cold bit deep. She should go back inside, lock the door, pretend she saw nothing, but she'd already seen too much. The trail was fresh, minutes old, maybe less. Whatever left it was still out there, possibly still bleeding, possibly still alive. Abigail crossed the yard, her worn boots crunching through frozen grass. The barn door hung open, swaying slightly in the wind. She hadn't left it that way. Her hand trembled as she raised the lantern higher. "I have a rifle," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. It was a lie. Her husband's rifle hung above the fireplace inside, unloaded, gathering dust since the fever took him 2 years ago. A sound came from the darkness. Not an animal. Something human. A stifled gasp of pain. Abigail stepped inside. The lantern light swept across hay bales and empty stalls until it found him. A boy, maybe 14, collapsed against the far wall. His doe-skin clothing was soaked with blood. His face, brown and smooth, was twisted in agony. His eyes, black and wide with fear, locked onto hers. Lakota. Her heart hammered against her ribs. 3 weeks ago, a Lakota war party had burned the Fletcher homestead 15 miles east. Last month, settlers had massacred a Lakota hunting camp near the river. The territory was a powder keg, and she was staring at the spark. The boy tried to move, to crawl away from her, but his leg buckled. Fresh blood bloomed through his shirt just below his ribs.
"He'd been shot. Please," he whispered in broken English, his voice barely audible.
"Please." Abigail stood frozen. If anyone found out she'd harbored a Lakota boy, if the settlers knew, if the cavalry knew, they'd call her a traitor. They'd burn her out, or worse. But he was a child, bleeding, dying. She thought of her own son, Benjamin, buried beside his father on the hill behind the cabin. He'd been 9 when the fever took him. She remembered his small hand going cold in hers. Abigail set down the lantern and moved toward the boy. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "Let me see." His eyes searched her face, looking for deception, for cruelty. Finding neither, his body sagged with exhausted relief. She pulled back the blood-soaked fabric. The bullet wound was high on his left side, still bleeding. He needed real help. A doctor, medicine, time she didn't have. In the distance, she heard it. Horses, multiple riders, moving fast through the night. The bounty hunters, maybe, coming back to finish what they started. Or worse, his people, tracking him here. Abigail looked down at the boy's terrified face and made her choice. "Can you stand?" she asked. He nodded, though she could see it was a lie. She hooked her arm under his shoulder and lifted. Together they stumbled toward the cabin, leaving a fresh trail of blood behind them. By morning she knew there would be a reckoning. The boy collapsed the moment they crossed the threshold. Abigail caught him before his head struck the floor, her arms straining under his weight. She dragged him to her bed, the only bed, and laid him across the quilt her mother had sewn 20 years ago. Blood immediately soaked into the fabric. She didn't hesitate. She'd nursed her husband through pneumonia, her son through scarlet fever. She knew wounds, knew fever, knew death. This boy wasn't dead yet. Abigail worked fast. She stoked the fire, set water to boil, and gathered what supplies she had. Cloth for bandages, whiskey for cleaning, needle and thread. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind raced. What was she doing? Harboring him was suicide. If the bounty hunters came back, they'd kill them both. If his people found him here, they might assume she'd hurt him. Either way, she was signing her own death warrant. But when she looked at his face, pale beneath brown skin, lips trembling with pain, she saw Benjamin. She saw every child who'd ever suffered, ever bled, ever called out for help, that never came. She couldn't turn away. "This will hurt," she said, though she doubted he understood. She poured whiskey over the wound. The boy's scream tore through the cabin, raw and primal. He thrashed, and she had to pin his shoulders down with her forearm while she worked. The bullet had passed clean through, a mercy. She packed the wound with clean cloth, front and back, then wrapped his torso tight. When she finished, he lay gasping, tears streaming down his temples into his black hair. "You're safe now," Abigail whispered, though she knew it was a lie. His eyes found hers in the firelight. "Takoda," he said, his voice hoarse. He pressed his hand to his chest. "Takoda." "Your name?" she asked. He nodded weakly. "Abigail," she replied, touching her own chest. "I'm Abigail." "Abigail," he said it slowly, testing the foreign sounds. Then his face twisted in pain again, and he spoke rapidly in Lakota, words she couldn't understand, his hand reaching for something at his side. She found it, a leather pouch, intricately beaded with patterns of eagles and lightning. Inside were sacred items, tobacco, sage, a small carved stone, and something else, a medallion made of silver and turquoise, far too valuable for an ordinary boy. This wasn't just any child. This was someone important. Abigail's stomach dropped. She just made everything infinitely more complicated. Through the night, she fought to keep Takoda alive. Fever set in near midnight, turning his skin hot as coals. He shivered violently despite the blankets she piled on him, muttering in delirium, calling out names she didn't know. She bathed his forehead with cool water, forced him to drink willow bark tea when he was lucid enough to swallow. Hour after hour, she stayed beside him, the way she'd stayed beside Benjamin during those final terrible nights. But she'd failed Benjamin. She'd watched him slip away despite everything she did. Despite every prayer she screamed at a God who didn't answer. She wouldn't fail again. Near dawn, Takoda's eyes fluttered open. The fever had broken, at least temporarily. He looked at her with something like recognition, like trust. "Why?" he asked in halting English. "Why help?" Abigail was quiet for a long moment. "I had a son," she finally said. "He was 9 when he died. I couldn't save him." Her voice cracked. "But maybe I can save you." Takoda's hand, weak and trembling, reached for hers. His fingers closed around hers with surprising strength. "My father," he whispered. "Dead tree moons. White men kill him." His eyes were wet. "My uncle, Chief. He look for me. He come. Your uncle is a Chief Abigail's blood turned cold?" Takoda nodded. "Mato Watakpe. Walking bear. Strong warrior. 50 men, maybe more. They hunt the men who shoot me." His breathing was labored. "When they find me here," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Abigail understood perfectly. A Lakota chief would find his nephew in a white woman's cabin, wounded, and what would he think? That she'd helped? Or that she'd been part of the violence? "You have to tell him," Abigail said urgently. "When he comes, you have to tell him I helped you." "I tell him," Takoda promised, but he very angry. "His brother, my father, killed by settlers. He trusts no white people now. Perfect. She'd saved the nephew of a vengeful Lakota chief who hated settlers. Through the window, the sky was turning gray. Dawn was coming. Takoda saw her fear. "You can go," he said. "Leave me. Run. I not tell them you here." Abigail looked at this boy, this brave, broken child who just offered to protect her even as he lay dying in her bed. She thought about running, about saddling her horse and riding for Fort Douglas, claiming sanctuary, letting someone else deal with the consequences. But she'd made her choice hours ago, when she'd carried him across her threshold. "I'm not leaving you," she said firmly. Takoda's eyes widened. "They kill you. Maybe, or maybe they'll listen." She squeezed his hand. "You rest now. Save your strength. You'll need it to speak for me when they arrive."
A sound cut through the early morning silence.
Distant but unmistakable. Drums. Then horses. Many horses. Abigail moved to the window and looked out, her breath caught in her throat. They were everywhere. Lakota warriors on horseback, at least 50, maybe more, surrounding her property in a perfect circle. Their faces were painted for war. Rifles and bows gleamed in the rising sun. And at the front, mounted on a massive black stallion, sat a man who could only be Chief Mato Watakpe. Even from a distance, his presence was overwhelming. Broad-shouldered, his face hard as granite, his eyes scanning her cabin like a predator studying prey. Abigail's legs nearly gave out. Takoda had been wrong about one thing. They hadn't come at first light. They were already here. Abigail couldn't move, couldn't breathe. 50 warriors surrounded her homestead in complete silence, their horses still as statues. The only sound was the wind cutting across the prairie and the distant cry of a hawk. Behind her, Takoda stirred. "Uncle," he whispered, his voice filled with equal parts relief and fear. Chief Mato Watakpe raised his hand as one the warriors dismounted. The synchronization was terrifying, a demonstration of absolute discipline, absolute loyalty. These were not raiders. These were soldiers. The chief swung down from his stallion with the grace of a man half his age. He was perhaps 45, with a face carved by wind and war. 3 scars ran across his left cheek. His chest was bare despite the cold, painted with symbols Abigail didn't understand. A headdress of eagle feathers marked his status, and at his hip hung a cavalry saber, a trophy, she realized with a chill, taken from some dead soldier. He walked forward alone. Every instinct screamed at Abigail to run, to hide, to grab a weapon. Instead, she forced herself to open the door and step outside. Her legs shook, but she kept her chin up, her hands visible and empty at her sides. If she showed fear, she was dead. If she showed aggression, she was dead. There was no right move here, only degrees of wrong. The chief stopped 10 feet away. His eyes, dark and cold as a winter river, traveled from her face to the cabin behind her, then back again. He was searching for weapons, for threats, for lies. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, the Lakota words flowing like water over stone. She understood nothing except the tone, demanding, dangerous. A younger warrior stepped forward from the line, his rifle held loosely but ready. He was perhaps 25, with intelligent eyes and a bearing that suggested education. When he spoke, it was in perfect English. "I am Nako. I speak for Chief Mato Watakpe, walking bear of the Oglala Lakota." His voice was neutral, almost bureaucratic, which somehow made it more frightening. The chief asks where his nephew is. Answer truthfully. It will matter when you die. When, not if. Abigail's mouth was dry as dust. "He's inside," she managed. "He's alive," Nako translated. The chief's eyes narrowed. He barked a question, sharp and accusatory. "Why is he here?" Nako asked. "What have you done to him?" "I saved him," Abigail said, her voice growing stronger. "He was shot, bleeding. I found him in my barn last night and brought him inside. I treated his wounds. I've been keeping him alive." As Nako translated, she watched the chief's face. Nothing, no emotion, no reaction. He could have been carved from stone. The chief spoke again, longer this time, his tone skeptical. "The chief says you lie," Nako translated. "White settlers shot his nephew yesterday when they attacked his hunting party. 3 boys escaped. 2 returned. Takoda did not. The chief says you are one of the settlers who did this, and you keep him prisoner to draw us here, to ambush us." "No." Abigail's heart hammered. "I had nothing to do with that. I live alone. I haven't left this property in weeks. Your nephew came here for help, and I gave it." "Then prove it," Nako said simply. "Show us." Abigail turned and walked back to the cabin. She could feel 50 pairs of eyes on her back, feel the tension in the air like electricity before lightning. One warrior thought she was reaching for a weapon, one trigger-happy mistake, and she'd die before she hit the ground. She pushed the door open wide, then stepped aside. Chief Mato Watakpe entered with Nako close behind. 3 more warriors followed, their weapons raised. The rest formed a perimeter outside. The chief froze when he saw Takoda. The boy was awake, propped up on pillows, his torso wrapped in clean white bandages. His face was gaunt and pale, but his eyes were alert. When he saw his uncle, tears spilled down his cheeks. "Uncle," Takoda said in Lakota, his voice breaking. "Uncle, I thought I would die." The chief crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside the bed. For the first time, emotion cracked through his granite exterior. He placed his hand on Takoda's face, his thumb brushing away tears, and spoke rapidly in their language. Questions, relief, anguish, all mixed together. Takoda answered, his words tumbling out between gasps of pain. He pointed to Abigail several times. The chief's eyes tracked to her, and this time there was something different in his gaze. Not warmth, not trust, but calculation. The conversation continued for several minutes. Abigail stood near the door, acutely aware of the warriors watching her every breath. Nako listened intently, occasionally asking Takoda clarifying questions. Finally, the chief stood. He looked at Abigail for a long moment, then spoke. Nako translated. "Takoda says bounty hunters shot him. He crawled for hours, bleeding, until he found your barn. He says you could have killed him easily or left him to die. Instead, you risked your life to save his." Nako paused. The chief wants to know why. Abigail met the chief's eyes directly. Because he's a child. Because he was hurt. Because it was the right thing to do. Nako translated. The chief's expression remained unreadable. "The chief says his nephew is too weak to move," Nako continued. "The wound is serious. If we carry him now, across rough terrain, he will die before we reach our village." The warrior's voice dropped. The chief must decide. Does he trust you to continue caring for Takoda, or does he take the boy now and hope he survives the journey? The silence stretched. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Then the chief spoke, short, decisive sentences. "The chief will stay," Nako translated. "He and 2 warriors will remain here while the boy heals. The rest will return to warn the tribe that Takoda is found." Nako's eyes bored into hers. "But understand this, white woman. If his nephew dies under your care, if any harm comes to him, Chief Mato Watakpe will paint this prairie with your blood. You will die slowly, and your screams will be heard for miles." Abigail nodded, her throat tight. "I understand. Do you?" Nako stepped closer. The chief's brother, Takoda's father, was killed 3 months ago by settlers who shot him in the back while he was fishing. Takoda is all the family the chief has left, all he has left in this world. His voice was soft but lethal. "You hold his heart in your hands, woman. Do not drop it." The chief barked an order. Warriors began filing out. Within minutes, most had mounted and were riding away, leaving only the chief, Nako, and 1 other warrior, a massive man with a scarred face who looked like he could break Abigail in half without effort. Chief Mato Watakpe settled into a chair across from Takoda's bed, his saber laid across his knees. His message was clear. He would watch. He would wait. And at the first sign of betrayal, he would strike. Abigail moved to the stove, her hands somehow steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. She began preparing broth for Takoda, aware of the chief's eyes following her every movement. Days, she thought. Maybe weeks. Trapped in her own cabin with a Lakota war chief who had every reason to hate her. What could possibly go wrong? 3 days passed like 3 years. Abigail had never felt so watched in her life. Chief Mato Watakpe sat in her rocking chair like a stone sentinel, his eyes tracking her every movement. When she changed Takoda's bandages, he watched. When she prepared food, he watched. When she stepped outside to draw water from the well, Nako followed 3 paces behind, rifle in hand. The 3rd warrior, the massive scarred man, stood guard outside. His name was Hoka, Nako had explained, which meant badger. It fit. He looked like something that could tear through obstacles without slowing down. The tension was suffocating, but something unexpected was happening. Slowly, carefully, like two wild animals circling each other, Abigail and the chief were beginning to communicate. It started with Takoda. The boy's fever spiked on the second night, and Abigail worked frantically to bring it down. She barked instructions at Nako: more water, more blankets, hold him still, and to her surprise, the chief moved to help without being asked. He held Takoda's shoulders while she cleaned the wound, his face etched with worry so profound it transcended language. When the fever finally broke near dawn, the chief met her eyes across the bed. For the first time, she saw something other than suspicion there. Respect, maybe. Or at least acknowledgement. By the fourth day, Takoda was strong enough to sit up and eat solid food. Abigail made venison stew. The chief had brought in a deer, field-dressed and quartered, leaving it outside her door without a word. It was an offering, she realized, payment for her care. As Takoda ate, he began to talk. He told them about the bounty hunters, 4 men with rifles and whiskey breath who'd opened fire without warning, about his friends Running Elk and Little Thunder who'd helped him escape, about crawling through the darkness, certain he would die alone. I prayed to Wakan Tamka, Takoda said softly, using the Lakota name for the Great Spirit. I asked for a sign, for help. He looked at Abigail. Then I saw your light. The chief spoke in Lakota, his voice rough with emotion. Nako translated quietly. The chief says the Great Spirit works in mysterious ways. He says perhaps you were sent to save Takoda for a reason neither of us yet understand. Abigail felt tears prick her eyes. Tell him I'm honored to help. That evening, as Takoda slept, the chief did something remarkable. He began to speak, not to interrogate or threaten, but to share. Through Nako's translation, he told Abigail about his brother. His name was Chaitan. Swift Hawk. The chief's voice was low, almost gentle. He was a fisherman, not a warrior. He loved peace, loved his son more than life itself. The chief's jaw tightened. 3 moons ago, he was at the river with 2 other men from our tribe. Settlers came. They wanted the fish. When Chaitan said they caught them first, one settler shot him in the back. Nako's voice was flat, but Abigail could hear the rage beneath. The other 2 men were killed as well. The settlers took the fish and left the bodies for the wolves. Abigail closed her eyes. I'm so sorry. Sorry does not bring back the dead, the chief said through Nako. But then he added, but kindness to the living, perhaps that matters more. He looked at her directly. You could have let Takoda die. Many of your people would have. They see us as animals, as obstacles to their expansion. His expression hardened. But you saw a boy, a child who needed help. That is rare, white woman. Rare enough that I begin to understand why the Great Spirit led my nephew to your door. Abigail swallowed hard. I lost my son 2 years ago. Benjamin. He was 9. She had to pause, steadying her voice. I couldn't save him, but maybe I could save yours. Takoda is my nephew, not my son. No, Abigail said quietly. He's your son now. Anyone can see it in how you look at him. The chief was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded, just once, an acknowledgement between 2 people who understood loss. It was the most human moment they'd shared, but the fragile peace shattered the next morning. Abigail was outside drawing water when she heard hoofbeats, a single rider coming fast from the east. Hoka moved immediately to intercept, but the rider reined up just outside the property line. It was Caleb Morrison, her nearest neighbor, 3 miles away. He was a hard man in his 50s, a former buffalo hunter with a face like dried leather and eyes that held no warmth. Abigail, he shouted, you all right in there? She set down the water bucket. I'm fine, Caleb. His eyes locked onto Hoka, then scanned the property. She knew what he was seeing. Tracks everywhere, signs of multiple horses, smoke from cooking fires. "You got savages on your property," Caleb said, his hand moving to the rifle on his saddle. "How many? You being held hostage?" "No one's holding me hostage," Abigail called back. "Everything's under control." "Like hell it is." Caleb's face reddened. "I saw at least 50 of 'em riding through here 3 days ago. Now I see 3 still here, and you're telling me everything's fine?" Chief Mato Watakpe emerged from the cabin, Nako beside him. Both were armed. Caleb's hand tightened on his rifle. "You let them 2-legged wolves into your home, Abigail? Have you lost your goddamn mind?" "Watch your mouth on my property," Abigail snapped. "And lower that rifle before someone gets hurt. Someone's gonna get hurt, all right." Caleb's eyes were wild now, filled with the kind of hatred that came from years of frontier violence. "You're harboring the enemy. That makes you a traitor to your own kind." "My kind," Abigail said coldly, "are people who help dying children. What's your kind, Caleb?" His face twisted with rage. "We'll regret this." "I'm riding to Fort Douglas right now. I'm telling Captain Banks that you're being held by hostiles. He'll come with every soldier he's got. Caleb, don't—" But he was already wheeling his horse around. "You got maybe 6 hours before the cavalry arrives, Abigail. Hope your new friends are ready for a fight." He galloped away, dust rising in his wake. Abigail stood frozen, her heart pounding. Nako translated rapidly for the chief, whose face had gone dark as a thundercloud. "How many soldiers at this fort?" the chief demanded through Nako. 40, maybe 50, Abigail said, her voice shaking. "Under Captain Jerome Banks. She struggled to find the words. "He's not a patient man, not a forgiving one." The chief's hand went to his saber. He spoke rapidly in Lakota. "The chief says we should leave now," Nako translated. "Take Takoda and ride hard for our village. If we move quickly, we can be beyond their reach before the soldiers arrive." "Takoda can't ride that hard," Abigail protested. "The journey would kill him. Staying will kill us all," Nako said bluntly. The chief looked at her, and she saw the impossible calculation in his eyes. Save his nephew or lose him. Trust this white woman or assume her people were coming to slaughter them all. "There might be another way," Abigail said suddenly. "There's a man, Father Patrick Dunn. He's a missionary, works with both settlers and Lakota tribes. He's respected by both. If I could get word to him—" "He is 1 day's ride from here," Nako said. "The soldiers are 6 hours away. The numbers do not work. Then we make them work," Abigail said fiercely. "We send Hoka to fetch Father Dunn. He rides fast enough. He can be back before nightfall." The chief shook his head, speaking sharply. "The chief will not divide his forces," Nako translated. "We stay together. We fight together if we must. Fighting guarantees Takoda dies." Abigail's voice rose. "Is that what you want? To watch your nephew bleed out in the crossfire of a battle you can't win?" The chief's eyes flashed dangerously. For a moment she thought he might strike her. Then Takoda's voice came from the doorway, weak but clear.
"Uncle."
"Please, listen to her." Everyone turned. The boy stood there, one hand pressed to his bandaged side, his face pale but determined. "She saved me once," Takoda said in halting English. "Maybe she save us all." The chief stared at his nephew, at Abigail. At the eastern horizon, where, even now, a cavalry unit was being assembled, his decision would determine whether they lived or died, and time was running out. Chief Mato Watakpe stood motionless for 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. His eyes moved from Takoda to the eastern horizon, calculating odds that didn't favor anyone. Finally he spoke. "Hoka rides for this priest," Nako translated. "But if the soldiers come before the priest returns, we fight. The chief will not surrender to white man's justice. He has seen what that means." Abigail nodded, relief and terror mixing in her chest. "Thank you." The chief's expression remained hard. "Do not thank me yet, white woman. We may all be dead by sunset. Hoka mounted within minutes, riding west toward the missionary settlement at a punishing gallop. Abigail watched him disappear, then turned to face the inevitable. We need to prepare, she said. The next 3 hours were a nightmare of waiting. Nako helped Abigail move Takoda to the root cellar beneath the cabin, not ideal, but safer than being caught in crossfire. The boy protested weakly, but his uncle's command silenced him. You will stay hidden, the chief said in English, the first words he'd spoken directly to Takoda in Abigail's language. You will live. That is all that matters. Takoda's eyes filled with tears. Uncle, I cannot lose you too. The chief knelt beside his nephew, placing both hands on the boy's shoulders. When he spoke in Lakota, his voice was thick with emotion. Nako didn't translate, but Abigail understood the meaning. Goodbye. Just in case. By the time they heard the drums, military drums, not Lakota, the sun was past its zenith. Abigail stood in her doorway, the chief and Nako flanking her on either side. She'd changed into her best dress, pinned her hair up. If she was going to face a firing squad, she'd do it with dignity. Captain Jerome Banks arrived with 30 cavalry soldiers in perfect formation. He was exactly what Abigail expected, mid-40s, ramrod straight, with a face that had forgotten how to smile. His uniform was immaculate despite the dust. His hand rested on his sidearm. The soldiers formed a semicircle around the cabin, rifles raised and ready. Banks dismounted, his eyes sweeping the scene with military precision. When he spoke, his voice carried across the prairie like a whip crack. Mrs. Hayes, step away from the hostiles immediately. They're not hostiles, Captain. They're guests. A muscle twitched in Banks's jaw. Ma'am, I don't know what these savages have told you, what threats they've made, but you're safe now. Step aside and let us handle this. Handle what exactly? Abigail's voice was steady. There's a wounded boy in my home. These men are protecting him. No one here has committed any crime. The crime is their existence on settler land, Banks said coldly. We've had reports of Lakota raiding parties all along the territory. 3 homesteads burned, 7 settlers killed. Now I find 2 armed warriors on your property, and you expect me to believe you're voluntarily? I am here voluntarily, Abigail said firmly. I'm treating an injured child, that's all. Banks's eyes narrowed. Caleb Morrison says there were 50 warriors here 3 days ago. Where are the rest? They left. Only these 2 remain to watch over the boy. A likely story. Banks turned to his men. Sergeant, prepare to... Captain Banks. Nako stepped forward, his rifle held across his chest in a non-threatening position. His English was crisp, educated. My name is Nako. I was educated at your Carlisle school. I speak your language. I understand your laws. We have broken none of them. Banks looked startled. Educated Indians weren't part of his worldview. But he recovered quickly. You're trespassing on setter land. That's enough. This woman invited us to remain while she cares for our chief's nephew, Nako replied. Her land? Her choice. Is that not your law? Our law doesn't extend to harboring enemy combatants. We are not combatants. We are family members caring for a wounded child. Nako's voice remained calm, but Abigail could see the tension in his shoulders. If you force us to leave, the boy will die. Is that your justice, Captain? Killing children? Don't you dare lecture me about justice, Banks snapped. Your people killed 7 settlers last month.
And your people killed 23 of ours.
Nako shot back. Shall we count bodies until the earth is soaked with blood? Or shall we try something different? The standoff stretched. 30 rifles pointed at 3 people. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and it would become a massacre. Then Chief Mato Watakpe spoke. His Lakota words were measured, almost gentle. Nako translated. The chief says he understands your anger. He shares it. His brother was murdered by settlers 3 months ago, shot in the back while fishing. His nephew, the last of his family, was shot by bounty hunters 5 days ago. The chief has buried too many family members at the hands of white men. Nako paused. But this white woman chose differently. She chose life over death, compassion over hatred. The chief asks, "Can you do the same?" Banks's face reddened. "I've got my orders. All Lakota found on settler land are to be detained or driven off." "Those are my orders from Fort Douglas, Command." "Then you're choosing war," Abigail said quietly. "Right here, right now. You'll kill these 2 men. I'll die trying to stop you. And that boy in my cellar, that 14-year-old child who's done nothing wrong, he'll die too." "Is that the story you want to tell? Is that the legacy you want?" "My legacy is protecting American settlers," Banks said, but his voice wavered slightly. "By killing children?" Abigail took a step forward. "Captain, I'm a widow. I lost my husband and son to fever. I have no love for death, but I have chosen to save a life instead of take one. I'm asking you, begging you, to make the same choice." Banks stared at her. She could see the war behind his eyes, duty versus conscience, orders versus humanity. "Ma'am, step aside. That's an order." "No." The word hung in the air like a gunshot. "Mrs. Hayes, I will arrest you for treason." "Then arrest me," Abigail's voice rang out. "Arrest me for feeding a starving child. Arrest me for bandaging wounds. Arrest me for choosing mercy. But you'll have to shoot me first, because I'm not moving." For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then a voice came from behind the cavalry line, young, uncertain. "Captain, maybe we should wait for the colonel. Get proper orders before we—" "Silence!" Banks roared. But the damage was done. Doubt had entered the equation. The captain drew his sidearm, and Abigail's heart stopped. This was it. He was going to shoot her. Chief Mato Watakpe moved faster than she'd ever seen anyone move. He stepped in front of her, his body a shield, his hand on his saber. "You want war?" the chief said in broken English, his first words to the captain. "Then kill me first. But woman lives. Boy lives, or we all die together." Banks aimed his pistol at the chief's chest. 30 soldiers tensed, fingers on triggers. And from the root cellar, impossibly, came Takoda's voice, weak but clear, singing in Lakota, a death song, preparing to die with his family. The sound broke something in the air. Several soldiers lowered their rifles, faces stricken. They'd signed up to fight warriors, not listen to children sing their own funeral songs. Banks's hand shook. "Damn you," he whispered. "Damn you all!" Then, from the western ridge, a shout, "Captain Banks!" "Hold your fire." Everyone turned. 2 riders crested the hill, galloping hard. One was Hoka, his horse lathered with sweat. The other was a man in black robes, a wooden cross bouncing on his chest. Father Patrick Dunn had arrived. And riding beside him somehow was a third figure in a Union cavalry uniform with officer's insignia, Lieutenant Marcus Freeman. Abigail had never heard of him, but the way Captain Banks's face went pale, she knew one thing: everything had just changed. Lieutenant Marcus Freeman dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent his life on horseback. He was younger than Banks, perhaps 30, with sharp features and skin the color of burnished copper. His mother had been Cherokee. Abigail would learn later. His father, a freed slave who'd fought in the Union Army. He was everything Captain Banks wasn't: calm, measured, and unafraid. "Captain Banks," Freeman said, his voice carrying absolute authority despite his lower rank. "Lower your weapon. That's an order from Colonel Whitmore himself." Banks's pistol wavered. "Lieutenant, this is my operation." "Was your operation?" Freeman produced a folded document from his jacket. "Colonel Whitmore received word of a potential massacre in progress. He sent me to prevent it. This order supersedes yours. Stand down. Now." Banks' face turned purple, but he holstered his pistol. The soldiers visibly relaxed, rifles lowering. Father Dunn dismounted, his aging joints creaking. He was 70 if he was a day, With kind eyes and hands weathered from decades of frontier work, he'd buried settlers and Lakota both, had earned respect through action rather than words. "Abigail Hayes," he said warmly, moving past the soldiers like they were invisible, "I received word you needed help," though I confess young Hooker's explanation was somewhat frantic. Despite everything, Abigail nearly laughed. Father Dune. Thank God. Indeed. The priest looked at Chief Mato Watakpe and offered a slight bow. "Chief Walking Bear, I am honored to see you again, though I wish the circumstances were different." The chief inclined his head, recognizing someone he'd met before, someone who'd proven trustworthy. Freeman stepped forward, addressing everyone. "Here's what's going to happen. Everyone will lower their weapons. Mrs. Hayes will explain the situation. I will verify her account with the injured boy. Then we will determine the appropriate course of action based on facts, not fear." "Understood? Lieutenant, regulations clearly state," Banks began. "Captain," Freeman's voice went cold as January ice. "You are about to execute a civilian woman and 2 unarmed men based on the word of a man known to hate Indians with irrational fervor. Caleb Morrison has filed 17 false reports in the past year alone. Did you verify his story before assembling a firing squad?" Banks said nothing. "I thought not." Freeman turned to Abigail. "Ma'am, please tell me what happened." "Everything. Abigail did," she explained, finding Takoda, treating his wounds, the chief's arrival, the fragile trust they'd built. Father Dunn listened intently, occasionally nodding. Freeman's expression remained neutral, processing information. "And the boy?" Freeman asked. "May I see him?" "He's in the root cellar. I moved him there when—" Abigail's voice caught. "When I thought shooting might start." "Smart." Freeman gestured to Father Dunn. "Father, would you accompany me? You speak Lakota, and the boy might trust you." They disappeared into the cabin. The chief moved to follow, but Freeman raised a hand. "With respect, Chief, your presence might frighten him right now. Let us speak with him first." It was a test, Abigail realized. Could the chief trust white men to care for his nephew even briefly? Chief Mato Watakpe nodded once. Waited. 5 minutes later, Freeman and Father Dunn emerged, supporting Takoda between them. The boy was pale, trembling, but alive. When he saw his uncle, he smiled. "Uncle, still alive, still alive," the chief replied in English, his voice rough with emotion. Freeman addressed the assembled soldiers. "This boy was shot by bounty hunters 5 days ago. Mrs. Hayes saved his life at considerable personal risk. Chief Walking Bear and his men have committed no crimes. This is a medical situation, not a military one." "But, sir," one sergeant protested, "standing orders say all Lakota found on settler land are to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis," Freeman interrupted. "Those are the actual orders, Sergeant. What Captain Banks told you was his interpretation, colored by personal bias." Banks's face was murderous, but he remained silent. Freeman continued, "I'm ruling this a humanitarian situation. The boy will recover here under Mrs. Bear, Hayes's care. Once he's strong enough to travel safely, Chief Walking Bear and his men will escort him home. No arrests, no violence, no massacre." The words hung in the air like a benediction. Then a rifle shot cracked across the prairie. Abigail heard the bullet whip past her ear before she understood what was happening. Everyone dropped, scattering for cover. A second shot, this one struck Chief Mato Watakpe high in the shoulder, spinning him around. "Ambush!" Freeman shouted. "Northwest tree line!" But it wasn't an ambush. It was something worse. Caleb Morrison stepped out from behind a cottonwood tree, rifle raised, flanked by 3 other settlers Abigail recognized, local men who'd lost family to Lakota raids, men poisoned by grief and hatred. "You ain't taking the savages' side," Caleb screamed. "Not while I'm breathing," he fired again. This time the bullet was meant for Abigail. Chief Mato Watakpe, already wounded, bleeding from his shoulder, threw himself in front of her. The bullet that should have killed her struck him in the side instead, and he went down hard. "No!" Abigail dropped beside him, pressing her hands to the wound. Blood poured between her fingers. Everything erupted at once. Freeman's soldiers returned fire, forcing Caleb and his men behind cover. Nako dragged Takoda back toward the cabin. Father Dunn threw himself over both of them, human shield in priestly robes. "Cease fire!" Freeman roared. "Cease fire! Those are American citizens." But Caleb wasn't listening. He reloaded, aimed at the chief's prone body, ready to finish what he'd started. Abigail did the only thing she could. She covered the chief's body with her own. "You want to kill him?" she screamed at Caleb. "Then you kill me first!" Caleb's rifle wavered. "Abigail, move. You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm choosing to see people instead of enemies. I'm choosing life instead of this endless, pointless death." Tears streamed down her face. "When does it end, Caleb? When we've killed them all? When they've killed us all? When there's nothing left but graves?" Her words echoed across the prairie. Freeman's soldiers, positioned to fire, hesitated. Even Caleb's men looked uncertain. "My son is dead," Abigail continued, her voice breaking. "My husband is dead. I have buried everyone I loved, but I will not add more bodies to this land. Not today, not ever again." Caleb's face twisted. "They killed my brother, and I grieve for him," Abigail shouted. "But killing this man, this boy, won't bring your brother back. It will only create more orphans, more widows, more fathers burying sons." She looked at Freeman, at the soldiers, at everyone. "We have to choose differently. We have to." Silence. Just the wind and the ragged breathing of wounded men. Then Father Dunn stood, hands raised. "Caleb Morrison, I have known you since you were a boy. Your brother was a good man. Honor his memory by laying down that rifle. Honor him by choosing mercy." Caleb's hands shook. The rifle barrel dipped. "Let me help," Father Dunn said softly. "Let us all help each other." The rifle dropped. Caleb collapsed to his knees, sobbing. His men lowered their weapons, faces stricken with shame. Freeman moved quickly, disarming them, but gently. "Get them away from here," he told his sergeant. "Take them back to the fort. We'll sort this out later." Abigail turned her attention to the chief. His breathing was shallow, his face gray. 2 bullet wounds, both serious. We need to get him inside," she said. "Now." Together, Abigail, Nako, Freeman, even some of the cavalry soldiers, they carried Chief Mato Watakpe into the cabin. Takoda watched from the cellar entrance, tears streaming down his face. For hours, Abigail worked. She'd saved 1 life in this cabin. Now she fought to save another. Dawn was breaking when the chief finally opened his eyes. Takoda sat beside him, holding his hand. Abigail slumped in her chair, exhausted, blood-stained, but relieved. "You live," the chief whispered to his nephew. "We live," Takoda corrected. "Because of her." The chief's eyes found Abigail. "You stood between me and bullets." "You did it for me first," Abigail replied. Something passed between them then, understanding. Respect, the beginning of something that transcended the hatred tearing the territory apart. Freeman appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Hayes, the chief, should recover fully. You did excellent work. Again." He smiled slightly. "I'm recommending you for commendation. And I'm posting 2 soldiers here until the chief is well enough to travel. Protection, not imprisonment." "Thank you, Lieutenant." Outside, Father Dunn was conducting an impromptu service. Cavalry soldiers and Lakota warriors, standing together, heads bowed, praying for peace that seemed impossible yesterday but felt tangible today. Chief Mato Watakpe squeezed Takoda's hand, then looked at Abigail. Through Nako, he spoke words she would never forget. "You have given me back my family. In return, I give you mine. From this day forward, you are sister to the Lakota. Our people will know you, will protect you. will honor you." His voice grew stronger, and perhaps one day there will be more like you. More who choose life. More who build bridges instead of burning them. Abigail nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Takoda smiled. "You saved us all." "No," Abigail said softly, looking at the unlikely group gathered in her cabin. Lakota and settler, soldier and priest, former enemies, choosing a different path. "We saved each other." Outside, the sun rose over the Dakota prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. A new day. A new beginning. And in one small cabin, the first fragile seeds of peace took root.